seem like a huge amount when I was a little kid, but he was like always a part of my life. I lived in New Jersey at the very beginning of my life, and then after we moved to Pittsburgh, Ira was always in the picture at family events of every type. But he's always a little bit other, because he was 5 years older, and then he was 6, and he's 11, and then in fact he was really tall, and I was like a total pipsqueak. So I may not look it now, but it certainly was. So he was always like this kind of other cousin, like what's 5 years older? And he was always like Mr. Social, Mr. Gregarious, and I think that led him to being a very successful counselor at Emma Kaufman Camp near Pittsburgh, and he was not only a counselor there, but he was kind of like a mocker there, and he was like very involved, and to my delight, he actually got me a job there as a kitchen boy when I was in high school for one summer, which I needed a job, and that was just wonderful. This is just kind of little bits of unconnected stories. Like 2 years later, I was in Pittsburgh in the summer, about to go back to Princeton for my sophomore year, and Ira was in Pittsburgh, and my parents, or maybe my father, was about to drive me from Pittsburgh to New Jersey, slightly onerous trip it felt like at the time. And Ira said, well, actually, I'm about to drive to New York, I'll take you to Princeton. So off we went. And you know, Princeton at the time took like 6.5, 7 hours to get to. And I don't know how many of you ever drove with Ira, but we got there like no more than 5 hours. It was quite the thrilling ride, but obviously I lived to tell about it, and I'm glad to be there. My parents were glad that they didn't have to take me. Ira, as Alan said, was incredibly connected to his family. With no brothers and sisters, his cousins, his aunts and uncles were really his family. On his mother's side, all of the cousins are here, Linda and Chuck, my sister Eileen. We were always feeling very, very connected to him. And when Ira's mother was sick and dying, his mother's sister, Lillian, sorry. His mother's sister, Lillian, who everybody called Auntie. Well, Ira's mother asked Auntie to kind of take care of Ira. Now, Ira at this point was in his early 20s and didn't really need to be taken care of. But in fact, they did become incredibly close. And Ira told me a few years ago that before Auntie died, that he and she had talked together every day on the phone for years, which was kind of amazing, I thought. And he ended up taking care of her. He flew to New York many times, taking care of her. And he was also connected to the family when he arranged this celebration of Auntie's life, which took place about a year after Auntie died. He purposely had it in Pittsburgh for the express purpose that my parents, who couldn't travel at the time, who were still living in Pittsburgh, could come, and he did have this wonderful celebration for her there. Now, I've often thought about like how many ways Ira and I were really, really different. Like, and I wrote some of them down, like in high school, Ira was a football player, and instead of playing football, I played the violin. And I was like the most unathletic person, and Ira was the athlete. Ira was, as I said, very social, very gregarious, and, you know, I played chess. I was a nerd. It was like, you know, things like this. Ira went to college in what seemed like the West. It might not seem like that if he's in Colorado to you Californians here, but he went out west to college, and I went out east. Ira was obviously extremely into wine, and I've had, you know, maybe I've had 100 glasses of wine in my life, I don't know. Right, nothing against wine, but you know, there's a bit of difference. And Ira ended up being a business person, and you know, I work at a university. So we had like, yeah, you could think like we're not all that connected, but in fact we were. And I had occasion, I worked for a windmill company in the Boston area in the early 1980s that created the windmills in Altamont Pass that those of you who live around here, I see a lot of nodding heads. So I had a lot of occasion to come out to California, and I also came out because I would always like to go hiking in the Sierras. So I got to see Ira and Louise a lot way back then, and then later Ira, and eventually Ira and Sandy. And he was just so welcoming and so warm. It was just always kind of reliable. And then one particular incident which relates to Ira and food is he would always take me to various restaurants, and one day, this is back in the 80s, he took me to some Burmese restaurant in San Francisco. I'd never been to a Burmese restaurant, I think, before or since. And I still think of it as the single, like, best restaurant meal I'd ever had. So if somebody can tell me what that Burmese restaurant was in San Francisco, I'd love to know. I have no idea. on some big street, but what's that do? I discovered Ira and I would sometimes talk about